Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dan Siegel, and this is Jessica Dibb. And it is an honor to introduce you to this wonderful new contribution to our field, breathwork and psychotherapy. This is a labor of love and an incredible synthesis of science and spirituality in practical ways that any therapist can use, in fact, any human being can use, to really see how being aware of the breath, understanding the breath, feeling into the breath can create well being in their lives. So, Jessica, tell us a little bit about how you came to think of writing this book and what the experience of actually writing it was all about for you.
Well, thank you for that wonderful question, Dan. And also thank you for joining me in this conversation and for writing the foreword for this book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So, this, in a way, this book is so relational at its very core, which I know is something that you and many people that understand interpersonal neurobiology would really appreciate. Because Norton Publishers actually approached me and asked me if I would be interested in writing a book that was initially about integrating breath work into psychotherapy. And I just felt like, well, that's really interesting because my whole life I have been looking for a universal key because, you knew my father, and my father really was a proponent of the abolition of war, and he really believed that humanity could get to that place. And so, in addition to wanting to awaken everyone's potential, I also had this other layer of wanting to find a unifying medium of language, of relating, some kind of modality that everyone could use, regardless of their gender, their religion, their non-religion, their skin color, their political orientation, whatever it would be. And so I had already discovered by the time that Norton, came to me that really breathing had no particular culture associated with it. It had no particular set of dogma or beliefs associated with it. And it was this precious, precious thing that we have all become aware of. I think really since COVID, we're even more aware of it than ever, of how precious each breath is. And so I had already been developing ways that people could, as you said, bring awareness to their breathing and also bring it deep in their breathing, deep in their capacity to breathe, and even understand how adjusting the breath volitionally in different ways could help with everything from just simple self regulation to expanded states of consciousness. And I thought, what an interesting orientation integrating breath work into psychotherapy, because, of course, I have a great love of psychology and psychotherapy and all of the innovators in our field over the last 150 or so years, and or longer. And so that wouldn't have been the book I would have originally written, but then it really felt to me like this could empower the power of breathing, and it could help psychotherapy re-envision itself in the way that you've helped psychotherapy re-envision itself from the lens of interpersonal neurobiology, or John Kabat-Zinn has helped psychology or psychotherapy re-envision itself through the lens of mindfulness, or Jung helped, with the collective unconscious and attachment theory, all the different things that have. And I thought, for a psychotherapist or a clinician, so it doesn't have to just be a psychotherapist, obviously psychologists and psychiatrists, but also spiritual directors, counselors, really anybody who's working with the depth of the psyche of a human being. I thought this would be a powerful re envisioning. There's a relational field that is accessed when the clinician and the person who's come in are breathing, both aware of their breathing together. Something opens up. I think it really opens us up to the plane of possibility, Dan. And it makes things possible that would not otherwise be possible. I have literally seen miraculous things happen with just people breathing together. So I love that the book started in a relational way, that I was sort of offered an invitation and I accepted. And then I was lucky enough to eventually get the great editor, Deborah Malmud from Norton, who was really open to my vision being quite wide and deep. I told her I really do want to write this book so that it's not only for clinicians, but it will also be a handbook and a manual that anybody who wants to use this unifying language of breathing can do. And so somehow I was able to do that. And she was very patient while I took many, many years to do all of the research to make sure that it was really evidence-based, peer-reviewed science, pretty much through the whole thing. And that I had developed and honed in on those aspects of breath work and conscious breathing that people could practice in their daily lives on their own, and also bring into their healing rooms, whether they were the person coming to get assisted with their healing or whether they were the healer.
Beautiful, beautiful. And if someone were listening to us now and was totally unfamiliar with what the word breath work implies, what does it mean? What's the definition of it? And wanted to know, well, what does that mean, bringing breath work into therapy or using it with therapy? What is this breath work? How, in a succinct, kind of practical way, what would a person take inside of them? Like, okay, well, now I know from what I heard from Jessica speaking and, Dan having a conversation with her, this is what breath work means. What does breath work actually mean?
Mm. So, breathwork is a term that has surfaced or emerged since the late 20th century. That is a spectrum of breathing practices that are used for the enhancement of physical, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual well being. And a breath worker is somebody who has had sufficient training and understanding of some aspect along that spectrum of breathwork practices, that they are able to skillfully guide somebody to utilize them. In the book, I offer a framework that is 5 groupings of breathwork. And the first one is self-regulation and relaxation. So those are your very simple breathing techniques, really can be as simple as bringing awareness to the inhale and deepening it, and then really letting go on the exhale and allowing your whole body to kind of relax. It can also be more complex, using vocalization or having certain ratios of how long you're breathing in and breathing out. But it's basically simply resetting when we're developing too much cortisol, we've got sympathetic dominance, and those techniques will bring up parasympathetic uh, functioning, so that we're now more balanced again. Whereas group 2 is the mindfulness technique. So that is really about the incredible aspect, which of course runs through all 5 of these groups, of bringing awareness to the breathing. You know from your work that literally that simple act is the primary principle of breath work, because many different things begin to happen in the brain, and many different things begin to happen in the organs. And there's just a whole kind of integration that takes place. So anything that has to do with breath awareness, mindfulness, Zen, Vipassana, all of those kinds of things would be in that second grouping. The third grouping are what I call therapeutic interventions or therapeutic applications. And those are very specific breathing techniques that allow for the fact that deeper, shallower, through the nose, through the mouth, the ratio, are we breathing twice as long out as in, or are we breathing the same amount of time in and out? Are we curling the tongue? Are we, having an inhale that is 2 segments or 3 segments or 4 rather than just one? I mean, there are a lot of volitional adjustments that you can do with breath work, and many of them have been explicated in very ancient traditions through the yogic traditions and the scriptures and the Vedic writings that come from that time. And we're finding that modern science is validating this wisdom and teachings, and pretty much in alignment with all of it. So that's where you can take someone who's they're more dysregulated, maybe there's trauma. They can do coherent breathing, which is an equivalent amount of inhale and exhale, or one of these other kinds of things I was talking about, to heat up the body, cool down the body, to induce sleep, to create energy, to create focus, to have better access to our emotions, to have ability to be present to our emotions. So and I could probably go on and on. The fourth is about character development, really. I call it development, but it is about a human being becoming the best person they can be. What is it to have ongoingly, for instance, strength, empowerment, compassion, loving kindness, focus, empathy, all of these things, that discernment, wisdom, all of these qualities that we would all like to develop. There are specific breathing skills, breathing practices, some of them ancient, some of them emergent in this century, that will help us experience that in an embodied way, experience that quality in an embodied way. And then we can bring that into our daily life. And at the fifth group is about the capacity, it's really about contacting the plane of possibility in the most, I would say, even intense but also robust way. We're really dropping down underneath the conditioning that we have experienced in our lives. I mean, our breathing, we know there's even breathing movements in utero, even, and they mimic the breathing that we do outside of the womb. But certainly that first breath and every breath thereafter is informed by that first breath, or those first few breaths, on the kind of underlying all of those neural circuits. So when we can tap into those early breaths, in a sense, or the unconditioned part of us, we get access to our boundless self in a way, or our self that is not defensive, is not promoting, is not trying to manipulate reality, but is literally just experiencing reality. And that is where we get our expanded states of consciousness. We can have the contact with memory that we have not been able to access before. We can have contact with a exuberant life force. Every person has an urge to wholeness. Every person has an urge to awaken, to flower. And so this kind of breath work can really activate our capacity to feel that amount of energy. And it can give us a greater capacity to really deal with almost anything in life. And really those experiences, like there are at least 2 or 3 studies now that have come out that have shown that those kind of experiences through breath work can be equivalent or greater than what people can experience with psychedelics, except there's no side effects. So I think that when we understand the spectrum of breath work that way, therapeutically, with a clinician, or in our own personal growth in daily life, we're able to utilize those different aspects of breath work and breathing practices for different purposes. And then ultimately to just feel the beauty, the glory, really, the magnificence that we have this life force with us every moment that can be activated through one conscious breath.
That's beautiful. So, to summarize the 5, you began with self-regulation. List them for us so people can consolidate this in their memory that are listening to us. and can see the incredible ways you've organized breath work for really practical application.
Mm. So the first one is regulation. The second one is awareness. The third one is therapeutic. The fourth one is development. And the fifth one I call potential. Yeah.
Potential, this expansion of a sense of identity
Yes.
that is correlated with all sorts of ways well-being arises, right?
Yes.
That's beautiful.
It is.
Excellent. So any other reflections you'd like to add to summarize and so people can really take this to heart?
Well, one thing that I know that you would appreciate too, Dan, and I know many people would appreciate this, is that breathing is the most immediate unifying uh, medium that we have, and it's free for all of us. As soon as we begin to breathe consciously with awareness, and particularly if we deepen our breath and slow it down a little bit, we are able to we create global coherence in the brain. So we've got the neocortex participating now in the breathing instead of it just coming from the brainstem. And we also have greater limbic activation because we're having appreciation for our breathing. So we immediately put ourselves in a more advantageous, beneficial place of having this neural coherence that allows all kinds of things. In the book, I even talk about glial cells and all of these things that we are either positing or happening, or we even have some evidence for. So it's very, very unifying for a person. And I would say at the deepest level psychologically, what it permits us to do, again, I highly recommend that you have a very skilled therapist, breath worker with you if you're doing this kind of work, but we can learn how to be present to our internal landscape. Um, to use Jung's terms, whether it was the demons or the gods, or to use, maybe a more psychotherapeutic understanding, whether it's our fears and our traumas, or whether it is our potential and our capacities. You just learn that you can be present with it and that you can flow with it. And that ends or at least begins to dissolve or lessens the capacity that many of us have developed, or the habit that many of us have developed of self-rejection. You now have a biological way, an embodied way of not rejecting yourself, no matter what your internal experience is. So things like self-hatred, things like feeling that you're not good enough, things like feeling that you don't deserve something, they dissolve while you're doing the breath work. And then you're able to know what that experience feels like. And through continuing to breathe in your daily life, integrate that. I could go on and on about how it's unifying personally. It's also, though, unifying relationally. Just any two people sitting together and breathing in silence for a minute, 3 minutes, whatever it may be, or any 10 or 100 people, it's remarkable what can begin to take place because we're all tapping into a language that is deeper than the language that we use, and it's deeper than the conditions that we have. And we open our eyes and we see things more clearly with less lenses of discrimination or othering or bias. And that brings me to the last point about your beautiful question is I would want people to know, you've taught so often about how the primitive brain is wired to experience in group and out group, very wisely, of course, for protection. But when we are in a time of our evolutionary, our culture, where we're so activated all the time, like cortisol is just being activated by the constant stimulation, we're doing that triggering of who's my in group and who's my out group much more often. And then on top of that, we actually want to grow out of that anyway. We want to get to a place where we understand, as you've brought so much understanding to people about this, that There's really like, there's one kind of field. There's one there, we are relational beings, and there's a way. The brain is not confined. I'm sorry, the mind is not confined to the skull and the brain. And there's a way of living with compassion and understanding where we get that there's a we. There is a um, there is a collective experience. There's an intraconnection. And I cannot think of anything that is faster than conscious breathing to have us experience that place. And in 2020, when we had COVID, we had George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," which I think just was like a shot around the world, re-energizing, social justice issues, because everybody can relate to the fear of not being able to breathe. And that happened with COVID too. And then all these forest fires started breaking out, and 1 billion animals and people died in Australia, and then in Europe, and then in the United States. And I think that what breathing does is, the othering that we do can be done about anything. I mean, I could make it up about you and I right now. You're wearing glasses. I'm not at the moment, although I do wear glasses sometimes. My hair is longer, yours is not. We could make it up about religion, where we live, how much education somebody's had, how much money. I mean, there's no end of things that you can create othering about, in group, out group. But there's one thing that you can't do that about, and that's the group of breathers. There's only one group of breathers. We're all breathers. So I think that biologically, and also, energetically, and in terms of orientation and understanding, that truth is a profound wisdom that's waiting to be discovered by humanity. So I would say that that is a kind of like breath work. I dream of a world that is breathing centered, because I think that we will have less violence by a long shot, and we will have greater kindness and greater support of each other, which will awaken and make it possible for our potential to manifest.
That's beautiful, Jessica. So all of this beautiful wisdom you'll see here, and in the foreword I had the privilege of writing, you'll see me invite you as a reader to really look deeply at both the incredible science that Jessica summarizes by reviewing the literature, but also by interviewing some of the leaders in our field of science of breath. So there's a lot of science-packed practical applications here. And at the other side, you're going to see a lot of experience of our larger sense of identity. We can call it a we, this larger transcendent way that we live, that a lot of the research is showing that sense of belonging we get is emerging as a fundamental to mental health. And that's why this breathwork and psychotherapy is such a great contribution to our field. Jessica, thank you so much for this wonderful gift. And it's been great to have this conversation with you today. Everyone, enjoy the book and practice your breathing so we can all find the well-being and connection that's embedded in these wonderful practices that Jessica Dibb has outlined for us. Thanks so much for joining in.